Hey everybody, it's John from Humor and History. Hope you're all doing well. Today we have top 10 lies you believe about Britain. All right, so let's see if I believe these. I've heard some of these, but I'm learning.
Latest videos. For this list, we're setting straight those misconceptions you've always believed about this country.
Okay.
Number 10, all swans are property of the Queen. We've all been brought up to believe that all swans belong to the Queen, and therefore harming them or eating them is a big no-no. However, one 5-year-old swan enthusiast wrote to the Queen asking if she could have one, and the response she got surprised us all. A representative wrote back debunking the common misconception that seems to date back to the 12th century. The monarch actually only owns all unmarked mute swans in open water around certain areas of the River Thames and Windsor. Every year, local children are invited to witness the swan-upping event, which helps keep track of the birds.
What? Okay, so I've heard about the swan thing. I have. All right, but it makes sense that she doesn't own all of them, or I guess that now King Charles doesn't own all of them. But I can understand the ones around the area that, okay, that makes perfect sense to me. So believe it or not, I was kind of unsure. It sounded a little too, honestly, it sounded just a little too weird to think that all the swans in Great Britain were his. Okay.
Number 9, London is buried under fog. Fog everywhere. So begins Charles Dickens' Bleak House, and yet somehow the reputation has stuck even to this day. Due to the Industrial Revolution during the 19th century, Londoners did see an average of 63 foggy days per year, and in 1952, the Great Smog was said to have killed around 12,000 people.
Smoke from the capital's chimneys is being trapped at street level, which is aggravating the fog.
Nowadays, you'll actually find that London, or anywhere else in the UK really, doesn't even cut the top 10 foggiest countries around the world, with Grand Banks, Newfoundland, Canada taking the top spot. Once coal fires were banned, London saw less fog, and today it's not as common as you would think.
Yeah, so I do remember, excuse me, I do remember hearing about this when I was a kid. It happened because, of all the stories you hear, that aren't true. They're just fairy tales, or they're sort of made up. So you get this kind of thought that in England, Great Britain, the whole place is foggy. Then when you kind of grow up, you think, okay, well, it's more cloudy. And in reality, neither one are really true from my understanding. It's actually quite nice. So, I think that's just more of a children's belief. And old school children's belief.
Lady Godiva rode naked on horseback. Lady Godiva wasn't just a made-up figure from a Tennyson poem or a delicious brand of chocolate. In Tennyson's versions of events, Lady Godiva rode naked on horseback through the streets of Coventry in response to her husband Leofric's oppressive tax. In reality, there are some sources that suggest that her lord husband requested she do just that, but there is insufficient proof that she followed through, with most historians insisting that it never happened. This story only started making the rounds around 100 years after her death, and by a monk whose storytelling didn't always adhere to the truth.
Okay, to be honest with you, I don't know much about Lady Godiva. I mean, I know that the theory is that she rode around naked in response to the oppressive taxes on a horse. All I can say about that is, if it's true, possibly a lucky horse. I don't know really what she looked like.
7, Great Britain, the UK, and England are synonyms.
For England, James? No. For me.
Getting this wrong is a surefire way to make enemies across the UK. Just try asking a Scot what part of England they're from. Go ahead, we dare you. Great Britain is an island made up of England, Scotland and Wales. Great Britain and Northern Ireland together make up the United Kingdom. Emphasis on the northern, yes, that's another border you don't want to mix up. We'd also tell you about the Channel Islands, British Isles, Isle of Man, and so on, but we suggest you get your head around the basics first.
Yeah.
Then we can talk.
I had done a one of the first videos that I had done. I was screwing this up so badly, and you guys were calling me out on it. And yeah, that was not good. But Americans, it's not that they're not necessarily educated. It's like, you guys get world history, so you understand this, and your part in world history, if you're from Great Britain, you know that England is, a single country in the group of Great Britain. But, the United States, we are not taught, we don't get started being taught about kings, queens, the Roman Empire, that kind of thing. Our history is, that's what we call world history, and then we have American history. And that's one of the reasons that Americans are so kind of indoctrinated in things. We believe that the history, or a lot of people tend to believe that our history, real, history, if you're those kind of people, starts with the colonization and Native Americans, that kind of thing. It does not go back to ancient Babylon, the Greeks. I mean, it's those are for higher educated people. Generally, it's what it's more reserved for, and most Americans are lucky if they get a world history class.
Number 6, you're never far from a rat in London. Another stereotype of England's capital is that you're never more than 6 feet away from a rat at any given time. Now, London is approximately 1,572 kilometers squared, and there are around 10.5 million rats in the UK. You do the maths. It's possible that a former Minister of Agriculture invented this little rumour to promote hygiene in homes, which makes you wonder just how bad things must have been. According to Dr. Dave Cowan, the truth is that you're more likely to be around 50 meters away from a rat at any time. Sounds a lot less disgusting now, right? Yeah.
Okay, so after traveling, I don't necessarily believe that. I actually think that London or maybe Great Britain gets a bad rap about this whole thing. You'll have to excuse my voice. We've been having our soccer, aka football, final cup, you know what I mean, for our kids, and I've been yelling a lot, losing my voice. Not yelling, but just trying to get them to hear me. I went to Tierra del Fuego, El Fin del Mundo, Ushuaia, and that's the tip of South America, and that was, there were more rats there than I have ever seen in my entire life. So rats are everywhere. New York City's got a ton of them, and I'm not just talking about little furry creatures.
5. Richard III was a bad guy. Chances are, if you grew up in the UK, you were taught about the villainous Richard III, who walked around with a limp and had a hunchback. History tells us that he was this terrible geezer who stole the throne from his brother, locked his nephews in a tower, and ultimately had them killed. But in reality, when his reign came to an end, the Tudor dynasty took the throne. And let's just say that historians decided to record things a little differently. Shakespeare may have played his part in this retelling of events too. There's taking creative license, and then there's completely rewriting history.
A horse! My kingdom for a horse!
Completely rewriting history is a thing everybody does. If you look at, for us in the United States, it would be Christopher Columbus. That guy was a murderer, a rapist, a massive manipulator, killer of. I mean, he was really a horrible guy. But up until, I don't know, like the 1970s and 80s, it really wasn't out in the open that was a thing. The reason it was played up like that, and we even had a Columbus Day, was because of a lot of Italian immigrants that came to the United States, and they didn't really have a rallying point, and they created Columbus Day. And that's one of the reasons. There's a lot of other things, but that's one of the key things. Is we have a lot of immigrants, so we play towards the immigrants, to sort of be inclusive, I guess. But I can see that, to the victor goes the spoils. After somebody passes away, you say whatever you want about them. Keep your own power. So, yeah.
For Big Ben is a clock.
No.
One of the most iconic features of the London skyline has been dubbed Big Ben by tourists and locals alike. But it wasn't always called that. In the Victorian era, it was called St. Stephen's Tower. And until recently, it was just named the Clock Tower. And you really can't go wrong with that. However, today its official name is the Elizabeth Tower, in celebration of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee in 2012. But as interesting as this is, it's all superfluous for the discussion at hand. That's because Big Ben is the nickname of the bell, not the tower that houses it.
Interesting. Okay.
Number 3, the Great...
That's pretty cool. Yeah, it's bells are a big part of history, and that would be probably one of the biggest ones, I guess there is. Interesting. I love nicknames. They're kind of cool.
The Great Fire of London ended the plague. When you learned about the Black Plague at school, it was almost always immediately followed by a lesson about the Great Fire of London, because it was said that this fire that devastated London actually brought an end to the plague, right? Well, no, not really. The fire only burned up about a quarter of urban London, with the worst areas affected by plague, Whitechapel, Clerkenwell, and Southwark getting through it with barely a singe. By the time the fire started, deaths from plague were already on the decline, but once the fire was over, it was still not extinct. Number 2.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I was reading something on the plague the other day about, and I think this is true. It sounds like it could be true, I should say. It was an online article about people with cats and the plague and how they ended up living. More people with cats lived through the plague than not. I'm not sure about how well records were kept, but it kind of sounds plausible. Very interesting.
The royal family always lives in Buckingham Palace.
No.
Crowds swarm Buckingham Palace every year in the hope of seeing the changing of the guards, or better yet, a member of the royal family leaving the palace to run some royal errands. The only problem is, none of the royal family live full-time in Buckingham Palace. It's more like the Queen's office and a nice venue for special events.
Said it very heavy.
Yes.
People also mistakenly look out for the Union Jack to know if the Queen is in, but it's actually a different flag, the Royal Standard, that's flown at the royal residences, Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, or Sandringham House when she's present. Number 1.
Yeah. Yeah, I know she doesn't live there. She's got she had places all over the place. I don't know where Charles lives. I'm not up on my King Charles yet, so I'm working on it. So I'm not gonna make all these comments.
The Queen is all-powerful. The job description of monarch has changed since the days of Henry VIII.
Yes.
But the Queen still does have a number of powers, and it's not all about travelling the world and waving politely. But in today's British Constitution, she has ministers who are entrusted with exercising her powers. The Queen can summon Parliament, sign bills into laws, appoint or remove ministers, appoint the Prime Minister, and declare war, just to name a few.
Oh, really? Please.
Yeah.
A lot of
I'm just gonna say that clip didn't age well.
these motions are ceremonial, but it's good to know that if we were ever on the verge of war, the Queen has the power to pull that plug.
Yeah. All right. So that's interesting. They say the people with the most power, or some of the greatest rulers, are the people who don't exercise their power. I always thought I always had a special spot for Queen Elizabeth. I thought she was an interesting figure in history, especially in terms of monarchs, but in terms of just historical figures. I don't know so much about Charles, but we'll see what happens. And I'm going to leave that there. All right, guys. I'll talk to you later. Have a great one.